Monmouth Planning Commission for Tuesday, July 30th for a work session to review the progress on our transportation systems plan. And David, are you staffing this tonight? Russ is? Oh, good. In case we need to beat someone up, David Carr in the corner. So, Russ, if you'd like to introduce our consultant this evening, and we'll get started.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can everybody hear me just fine? Oh, okay. Thank you. Yes. Tonight is an opportunity to hear from City Council members as well as the Planning Commission on efforts so far with the Transportation System Plan update. Mailed out to each of you the what we're calling Tech Memo 4, which is a solutions development memo. In that memo is a summary of work to date by the consultant. The city hired DKS Engineering to walk the city through updating our master plan. In the room with you tonight is Anthony Galo. Anthony has been the project lead on this, representing DKS. And then tonight he'll walk you through a PowerPoint. What we hope to get from you is some feedback on project lists that has been developed through this process, as well as if there's things that you think aren't included in that list that would be important. At the end of the day, we want this transportation system plan to represent Monmouth needs, and so hearing from you tonight is an important step in that direction. After tonight's meeting, Anthony and his team will take feedback that they've gathered through the process to date, as well as feedback from you tonight, and move forward with actually drafting or developing the transportation system plan document. I think before I turn it over to Anthony, we're looking at trying to bring this to Planning Commission and Council in public hearings, and with the goal to adopt it early, either late this year, December, or January of next year. And with that, I'll turn it over to Anthony and let him take it away.
Thank you, Russ. Can you hear me okay? Everyone online? Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for having me tonight. My name is Anthony Galo. I am a transportation engineer and planner with DKS Associates. I've been working with your great staff over the past year to get to this point. And our end goal is, like Russ said, to come up with, to develop a TSP document, updating the one from your last one from 2009 to meet today's standards, and to equip and empower your staff, your elected and appointed officials to move forward over the planning horizon into what we've identified as a planning horizon 2045. So I have a brief presentation for you tonight, but tonight is really about what I can walk away with having heard from you all, right? Because we are getting down into that refinement stage of the process, and we've had an enormous amount of public outreach and working with an advisory commission, right? So a technical advisory committee. So we've put a lot of work into this to this point, and we are really kind of entering the home stretch. So I'll talk a little bit about the project background, talk about timeline, outreach, how we got here, and touch on the projects that are in that tech memo that you have before you, tech memo number 4, which is identifying possible projects and solutions. It's, for those of you that have looked at it, it is a heavy document. There's a lot in it. I will not be quizzing you on the projects that are in it. I'll keep this high level, and again, I'm hoping to get feedback from you all on what you saw. And I'll touch on those projects, and I'll talk about next steps, where we go from here. So some background. What is a TSP? A transportation system plan. The Oregon code requires every city to have one. It's a document that describes your transportation system. It outlines projects, programs, and policies to meet your needs now and to forecast what your needs are going to be in the future, and based on what the community's aspirations are. It's basically the what, the how, and the when of planning related to transportation. And why are we going through this process? It's crucial to have a current TSP in place because it's going to empower your city to compete for funding as opportunities arise. Right? I know, for example, you recently embarked on a great Safe Routes to School project. Right? Well, that grant's a 2-year cycle through ODOT. Right? So once you've got this in place, you'll already have that database of projects for the next go around, right? And so on. And that's just one of many examples at the state and federal level of opportunities for you to identify and implement projects as your city is growing, which it definitely is. The other thing is that the 2009 TSP is outdated. The world has changed in these last 15 years. One thing that we heard throughout this process, I'll get that into this in a little bit more detail later, bike and pedestrian needs and considerations. I'm looking at you over there. We're a really big focus, right? And that's reflected in our project list. So at the start, we looked at, we worked with your city staff to come up with some goals and objectives, high level. I won't go into each objective now, there are numerous under each goal. But the goals, safety, mobility and accessibility, connectivity and functionality, livability and opportunity, and coordination and collaboration. As we moved through the process, through our advisory committee meetings, through our open houses, and as we were developing the documents, these 5 goals were the North Star that guided us through the process. Where we are now in the schedule, it is, we're wrapping up. We're getting there. We started back in summer, fall of 2023. We've been working really closely with your great staff, and we've been holding biweekly check-in meetings that I don't think we've missed one, or maybe we did around Christmas, but that was it. And we've been working very closely with staff. I had lots of touch points to make sure that we were all on the same page and that we weren't going to get any surprises, and that you all weren't going to get any surprises. And it's been a great process to this point. It's been pretty smooth, knock on wood, and we feel really good about where we are. And having been through a lot of these TSP processes, this one has been really good so far. And I really think that we're going to end up with a project that meets what the people of Monmouth want and need. We've to this point, we've gone through background, goals, and objectives. We've had our first public open house, which was right here, was really well attended. That was back in last January. We just had our second open house last week, not as well attended, but I get that with the weather. And we still got a lot of really good feedback. And we all got ice cream, so that was good too. Public outreach, I'll touch a little bit more on that. It's been really critical to get as much public feedback as we can get. Like I said, we formed a technical advisory committee that was comprised of local folks with local interests, bicycle and pedestrian advocates, representative from Western Oregon University, representative from police, your staff, someone from Chariots, someone from ODOT, someone from Independence, right? Monmouth is in a unique situation in that you're not on your own here, right? Your interests and the interests over in Independence are totally entwined, and the main roads going through your city are ODOT facilities, right? So they're going to be part of any conversation as well. So we've had them from the ground floor. I'm going to pretend I didn't see that. So we've had everyone in from the ground floor. I'm laughing. So again, to have no surprises and to really get everyone's feedback from the beginning, right? So that we can say that we arrived to this point and to where we're going with everyone's buy-in. So I'm going to get into the just real high level on the projects that we've identified at this stage for this tech memo that you had here. Five aspects that are more policy and programmatic. Functional classifications. We recommended some changes to some streets. Functional classifications, if you're not familiar with the term, they go from, in here, they'll go from an arterial, which would be your main streets, then a collector, then your local streets, right? And there are a few, not too many, I think we identified about a dozen that we recommended changes on, and a couple of them are already are newer streets already that maybe don't have a designation as they're being constructed now. Street standards, there's a section, you probably saw it, it jumps out in the document on the cross sections, the street cross sections. Those align with the functional classifications. Typically, a local street is going to have one type of standard cross section, whereas an arterial is going to have one that's completely different, right? You're talking about different volumes, different needs, different size of right of way. So we recommended some street standards for the general to be applied at a high level for the different functional classifications. Mobility standards, what a mobility standard is it's a standard for what an expectation should be on how an intersection should function, right? So a stop control intersection should function a certain way and have a certain level of service for traffic going through it. Signalized intersection is going to have a different standard. Right now, Monmouth doesn't have adopted mobility standards. We are making a recommendation in this TSP document that Monmouth identify, and well, we've identified them for you, and go ahead and adopt some mobility standards that we've identified in the document, and that's something that will come down the road through your council and planning commission processes. TIA guidelines, so that's traffic impact analysis. With the amount of development that you all see here, you're probably pretty familiar with them. If say a Starbucks is going to go in on a corner, right? They're going to generate a lot of traffic. They're probably going to be asked to do a traffic impact analysis, and that is going to require them to meet certain standards, and the standards are outlined in the TIA guidelines, right? And we've recommended some alterations to your established TIA guidelines that are in your code. It's nothing major. It's more just boiling down to a little bit more specificity in terms of volumes and actual crunching numbers in a couple spots. And access spacing. You also have requirements for your access spacing. I think we tweaked them slightly, and those recommendations are in the document as well. But at the open house, really the superstar to discuss is the project, right? That's what everyone's really interested about. And we identified almost 100 potential projects that don't worry, we're not expecting, they won't be expected to be built by the end of the year or anything, but think about it more as your library of projects, your database of projects, that when opportunities arise, that's where you go and identify the project, align it with the opportunity. It might be a grant, it might be some other funding, it might be development, right? And you can line those up, right? And it'll equip the city going forward and to have that as a guiding light there. And the 5 types of projects we identified are street extensions, intersection improvements, pedestrian and bike improvements, transit upgrades, and urban upgrades. And I'll get into what urban upgrades are in a little bit. And I can't stress enough that every project that was developed and is proposed was done so to meet the goals and objectives that were identified earlier in the planning process. So I'm going to go through just each category, just high level. Street extensions, we identified 14 potential projects. I don't know how from here, my eyes are starting to fail me. But yeah, if you look in the document, for example, on the north end of town, right, you'll see like purple dashed lines, right? Each one of those represents a proposed street extension, right, to improve connectivity. Right, you'll see those primarily on the north and south ends of town, and those were devised with the idea of improving connectivity for all users. Intersection improvements, those are pretty self-explanatory. We identified 10, most of those in your downtown area, and they vary in nature. It could be a slight widening, it could be a sidewalk or improvement or a bike lane installation leading up into the intersection. It could be the installation of like a left turn lane, or they vary in scope and scale. A word on ped bike improvements. By far, this was the highest number of projects that we identified, 41. Throughout the process, when we were working with the TAC, when we were at the open house, and just working with your staff, and we would ask them from time to time, your council, your planning commission, what's important to them, right? And what came back over and over again, pedestrian and bicycle improvements and safety, right? And it makes complete sense. This is a college town. There's a city right next to you all. We're looking for those good connections, east and west, north and south. And there are schools. We want everyone to be safe for all users, right? And one thing, the biggest challenge for planners and engineers like me nowadays is we find ourselves retrofitting everything from the 40s, 50s, and 60s, right? And it's a lot easier to develop a greenfield, up to, so that's why, your new developments are going to look a lot more like what you want them to look at nowadays. But it's not that easy sometimes when you're dealing with your downtown, where your buildings might all be from the 40s and 50s and 60s, right? And it was a completely different standard, a completely different time. So in many cases, you have to sort of, how would I put this? You have to you can't just plop it all down in an entire corridor. You have to identify opportunities, pick your spots, right, and line them up. And then down the road, hopefully you have an entire corridor improvement. And these projects are set up to hopefully equip you all to have that, right, as the funding opportunities arise, of course. Transit upgrades, like I said, we had a representative from Chariots and from the trolley on our TAC, and they were super informative and very helpful and engaged on the process, and helped us to arrive at where we are now with our transit upgrades. Some of them are, adding a stop, extending the route a little bit. It might just be a case of improving existing stops, right, and making them ADA accessible, that kind of thing. Finally, urban upgrades. Think about those more as like your overall kind of corridor improvement. We identified 19 of those. For example, Gwynn Street. When we call for a Gwynn Street urban upgrade, we're not just talking curb to curb. It's the right of way for the whole street. That's going to include sidewalk, any planter strips, your stormwater, all of it. And the idea is to improve it and to have a vision for how it will function in the future, so that it's safe and comfortable for all users, not just folks in cars, right? We also discussed in the document some implementation measures, things like neighborhood traffic calming. These are lower hanging fruit that you all can implement to make the experience a little wider, a little like on your little side streets, right, where folks are riding bikes or walking more. How to make those streets more comfortable for folks on bikes, folks that are walking. We are going to include in the final TSP, it's not in this document, but the final TSP will include a toolbox of possible treatments, right? And it'll include high-level cost estimates as well for each tool. Electric vehicle recommendations. We came into this process thinking that we might hear a lot about electric vehicles from the open house and the TAC. It wasn't as big an amount of feedback on electric vehicles as we might have thought. There isn't a huge desire, at least that we've detected to this point, for electric charging facilities on public property. Like, for example, if you're parallel parking or anything, or I believe there's maybe a spot here, because this is a new facility. There might have been an electric one, or there was going to be. Yeah, and I know there's a charging station at I think it's at the Dairy Queen. So, yeah. So I think that's something that everyone is still kind of figuring out how that's going to work. And so to this point, we're recommending, staying abreast of it, having your staff stay abreast of it. What are the emerging trends? But right now, we're not recommending any major actions as of yet. Traffic signal warrants and OR 99. So 99 was the only, we studied, I didn't mention before, we studied a couple dozen intersections pretty closely early in the process throughout the city to see how they're functioning now and to forecast how they'll function in 2045. The only intersections that are projected to fail in 2045, and fail doesn't mean, Manhattan level backup or anything, just that it's not functioning to the level it should, are on 99, right? And which shouldn't come as a surprise anyway. And so there are 2 signals on 99 right now and a few stop control intersections. Where our recommendation is to continue to work closely with ODOT. I know. And continue to work closely with ODOT and monitor how those intersections are functioning. And right now, I know it's tough in some locations to, for example, make a left onto 99 off a side street. We did run some analysis with folks making 2-stage left turns using the center turn lane, and that reduces everything down below that sort of failure threshold. I know it's not the most comfortable thing to do in the world. Yeah, that's what I do too. But it's definitely not something that's super comfortable for everyone, and it takes an adjustment period. As of right now, that's what we have as a recommendation, but we're aware that that might not be super popular, or that it might have an adjustment period for the public as they get used to having that available to them. So next steps, we will go and we're already working on Tech Memo 5, which is basically a narrowing down of this memo, right? The project list, and confirm up that project list, and then draft the updated TSP, incorporating this excuse me, this tech memo, the previous tech memo, and all the other materials that we've put together to this point. And we'll come back to you. I will come back here in the fall, depending on how that process goes. It'll be in the fall, and present to you that finished, that more polished finished product. And then it would be to you all to go to a public hearing and decide whether or not to adopt the final document as your updated TSP. So that's what we're looking at over these next 3-4 months. And so that concludes my presentation. I want to just reiterate that this was the result of a lot of work with that involved staff very closely, and some really engaged members of the public. And we're confident that the work we've done to this point and where we're going to the final TSP is an accurate reflection of what your city wants and what your city needs. And we're confident that you'll feel the same way when we come back to you down the road. And with that, I do welcome you all to ask me any questions or make any comments. This is why we're having this initial meeting, so that we can take those, like Russ said, and kind of bake them into the next couple of things that we do, make any adjustments we need, and go from there. And I do also want to reiterate that if you're anything like me, in 4 hours from now, you think of a question that you should have asked, unless we're still here in 4 hours, I have no idea, then please feel free to reach out at any time. This is certainly not your only opportunity to provide feedback. So we're always looking for that feedback. So, thank you so much.
All right. Questions of Anthony, whose contact information is on the last page of the slides here. So highlight that for those questions.
I have cards also. So.
Questions? Counselor Oberst doesn't have what?
I've had so many conversations with our consultant already because of being on the group that's working to create this document. I have 2 kind of big picture concerns. One is showing that Ash Creek Drive runs through my brother's bark pile, and recognizing that will never happen, and that we need to now identify what are we going to do to have that south side east-west connector. Where do we plan to put it in. Even if we have to draw it on the map outside the UGB, we need to have a plan in place now for how we're going to have a connection down there. The other one is the big picture. I was on 99 at Madrona the other day, and I watched a fellow who was eastbound on Madrona pull out into the center left turn lane to make a 2-stage left turn and go north on the highway. Just about the time somebody coming south on the highway pulled into that left turn lane to turn east on Madrona. And it's a disaster waiting to happen. And if we include that as a traffic release mechanism on ODOT's behalf, so they don't have to put us in a traffic light, I think it's a mistake. You know, I know driving standards change. I grew up and center left turn lane was for one thing, and that was for turning left. And then you start seeing people use that center left turn lane coming out of business driveways, and they don't pull into the lane, they use it as a merge. They drive in that lane until they can merge. That's illegal, but they do it. And now we're talking about having 2-stage turns out of side streets. At the same time, people are using that left turn lane to make a left turn off the highway. And if it were made illegal, I wouldn't complain. That's how bad I think it is. I think it's a great safety risk to all highway users, including bicycles and pedestrians. Okay, thank you.
Yes, Councilor Salinas Alvarado.
Thank you. So you have a great list here of the proposed projects, and I'm assuming these are like the top 5. Are they on any specific order? Are we waiting? Are these kind of the ones that we want to focus on and focus on funding as it comes up?
So those are the 5 project categories. The projects themselves are in the appendix. And the way that works is if and when the document is adopted, right? Any TSP is required to have a project list. And as opportunities for funding arise, right, your staff will then go to that list and identify, and it's not really over right now anyway, it's not prioritized, right? However, we do intend to include a cost constraint, a financially constrained list in the final TSP, right? So, because if we give you 90 projects that each cost $100 million, and what good are we really doing? We will identify, based on your last 10 years of project expenditures, right, and kind of model out what should be attainable over the next 10 years based on that, and have a separate list that is pulled from the overall list. These are the projects that we think you'll be able to fairly easily and painlessly find funding for based on the past to implement these over a certain period of time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilor Carey.
I have a couple, and I'm going to just sort of follow up with Councilor Ober's concern about the southern connector. There's a northern connector that runs from Riddle Road over to 16th. That's and south of Hoffman. That would require another light to get across Highway 99, and I don't think there's any chance ODOT's going to grant that, do you?
As things stand now, no, I do not. If this were, if it were as part of another street or streets being constructed, possibly that would require its own analysis. What's important to remember also with these is that these are these transportation projects are planning level, not engineering level. Every project you opt to implement from this list it'll require its own round of public outreach, its own round of coordination and collaboration with all the parties involved. In this case, it would be ODOT, obviously, and independents. And it would require all of that collaboration and outreach. These are just identifying the projects, not the very fine engineering level specs, the traffic analyses that are going to be required as part of the construction of those streets. That would require it, that would be its own thing at that point when that was identified by you all as something that you wanted to do, that you've identified. It's time for improved connectivity on the north side of town, that we have a tool to go and do it. Now is the time to, do our engineering investigations and work with ODOT, work with independents, and work with the county and identify how we're going to do that. And with these kinds of things, I know you see lines on a map, right? But when you get down there and actually start doing the surveying, it's very common to find a reason that you can't go along that line. And so that's why these are planning level guides. And down the road, it's going to require its own process.
Yeah, I get, and clearly, and that's the level that these are identified at, but it's going to require some bandwidth in order to determine that it's not going to work. It seems.
John, and I'm just gonna, aren't these related to potential development of that property too? We've already talked about the fact that if that property is developed, that a developer wanted to put access on 99, and we've already, so I think that's kind of what those are both tied to, because there's two spots that would come onto 99. And I think that's part
The
of that.
development east of 99 or west or both.
The development on the east of 99, the acreage south of Hoffman that we talked about just north of the creek.
Right, right.
So I think that's probably why those are in there, because that's developable land.
Exactly.
And I thought the plan was for a north-south access to that.
And
But, well, let's not
that's
get
there
into that.
too.
Yeah.
That's there too.
It does include that, yes.
Yeah.
Right, and the reason for having it, like Mayor Kuntz has pointed out, is if that area is developed, right, if you have the adopted plan that has identified that, the developer is going to have to meet what you laid out in the plan.
Yeah. You enumerated the goals for the, the project background, and I didn't get into the detail, but I guess I'm wondering, do these goals address in any way support for housing development, and where would that be? And economic growth, for argument's sake?
This is transportation centric. The idea overall is that it will support economic growth and it will support housing by making those connections for all users, right? One great thing about Monmouth is you have the bones of a great grid system here. And what we've identified in these projects is methods to try to complete that grid where possible and try to make it comfortable for all users where it's not currently. And that we believe will help support economic growth and housing development and making housing and developing attractive.
Councilor McKeela and then Commissioner Spiegel.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Commissioner Spiegel. I really like the priority that you have in here with the bicycle and pedestrian, and it seems to me it's kind of a bit of a low-hanging fruit to do some of the work along those streets to make those streets more compatible with bicyclists, particularly if you're looking at families coming out with kids on bicycles. So I really appreciate that. So, yeah, I guess that's all I wanted to say is that I think we could do a lot with a little bit and have, and satisfy that goal of livability. I think it's really good. So thank you.
Sure, thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm looking at page 16 and the map. I'm pretty good at maps, but
Okay.
this one, I would love it if there's an option to make a bunch of smaller maps that could identify maybe 6 city blocks at a time or something, maybe in the public forum, so that if people wanted to provide feedback, they'd be able to better identify. I know it's written in here in 28 through 32, but I'm not even aware of every single intersection on here. So just that, if that's an option.
We've got better maps than this that our creative services folks have put together, and they will be in the final documents. We also have a web map that's not in here, but I can share it with you all, which is basically like Google Maps where you can zoom in. And I'm not a paper person myself, right? So I prefer that kind of thing. And so if it's this map, but you can zoom in all the way as much as you want and click and identify the projects. I can share that with you.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. I think the attention to detail in the packet is awesome. And so I think allowing the user to interact with the map a little bit more. And just the only other thing, identifying that the downtown, maybe the 3-block nucleus here, right, is an important part. I'm super glad that Jackson and Clay were highly addressed in this. Just looking at city sidewalks, did you guys identify some, because I know that the city has identified it's the owner's responsibility to fix their sidewalk. And if that wasn't in here, I would just task the council and the planning commission with updating and making sure that we are requesting that all the city sidewalks are appropriate and that are fixed to be used appropriately. I know there are still some in that downtown nucleus that maybe are a challenge.
Yeah, we did identify where sidewalk infill and sidewalk improvement. We did not speak to policy with regards to who was responsible for maintaining it.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Adding on Commissioners.
Counselor McKeel and then Commissioner Campbell.
Thank you. And I believe one of those infill of the sidewalk, sorry. Okay. One of the infill is in Madrona School area, right? Where there's what is a street that has no sidewalks on it, but is part of where the kids are walking to school? Is
That's Heffley.
Happily.
Heffley is the north-south. There's also an east-west street that's just north of the main street there. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then so that one I think is, and I believe that one's on here as well, isn't it? Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I believe that one's about to be addressed.
Oh, I knew Heffley was, but I wasn't sure the east-west one was.
Oh,
The north-south Heffley is.
Yeah.
But I don't think Alberta, if that's the one that's east.
David?
So I'll just talk loud into the microphone, but we did apply the safe routes for that Alberta Avenue improvement, but due to it not neighboring a high-speed road, that was all local streets. We were in the bottom quarter in the last round, does not mean we want to apply again. But we have a safe route planning document that we're preparing, that we're pulling our safe route projects from, and that plan was reviewed and approved by ODOT too, so it makes the process a little simpler if we have something they've already looked at. But the Alberta one did not score very well. There were a lot more dangerous projects that were presented in the last go around. So I've got it prepared for the next 2-year cycle. It goes back through, but that's definitely a project the Alberta one we've been keeping it full time. I used to live in Alberta, so I know the kids walking right down the street.
Yeah. Do we need to have more people speeding along Alberta to make that a better?
Raising the speed limit to 45 miles an hour.
Russ, did you have something to add to that? And then Stephen, if yours is on this topic, I'll recognize you before Scott.
No, Scott should go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to the Alberta sidewalk discussion that we do have that in our 5-year CIP as a project. So it is a project that we've committed to putting money aside for. Obviously, if we can get a Safe Routes to School grant to construct that, it allows us to use our funds elsewhere to expand and do even more with bike ped projects.
Hey, Stephen, was that on this topic or?
No, no. Commissioner Campbell should go first.
All right, Scott, Commissioner Campbell.
Thanks. It seems like that a lot of these projects, I mean, Councilor Oberst mentioned it in that the east-west and east-west corridor, the main one that's used a lot right now is Madrona, which is not a great access street really, because it's congested and it feels like that people speed through there. But it seems like there's some significant obstacles to doing some of the extenders using Gwynn Street, which is the one I'm most familiar with. That connection between where Gwynn stops at Heffley and then out to 99. Is that developer dependent? I mean, would the developer have to decide to develop that property to make that happen?
It doesn't have to be. It's preferable because it's always good to make the developer pay for it.
Yeah.
Right. But it doesn't have to be.
Okay. Just one other comment about that intersection of Madrona, and it was, to me, as somebody who walks a lot and also uses that intersection a lot, it was a great advantage to move that crosswalk to the other side of the intersection, because just as John was alluding to, you've got people trying to make a left turn out of there. You got people trying to make a right turn out of there. You got people trying to turn left. And that crosswalk was right in the middle of all of that activity. So moving it to the other side, which I thought should have been done when they did the beautification project a few years ago, it helps a lot with that intersection, because you're not watching for pedestrians in the same way too. So it is a project. I am also concerned about this idea of a two-stage left turn. I mean, if we need to go left, well, we go down to Stapleton, actually, if we want to go to Corvallis, but which is a safer turn. But we will just make a right turn and go around and come back because it's easier. And I don't know, how granular do you want feedback at this stage of the?
Well, I'll take any feedback.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll take any feedback.
Okay, on the section which is talking about sidewalk infill and so forth, it's on page 30. There's a mention of a sidewalk infill on Stadium Drive from Main Street to, Jackson and beyond. There's a section of street there between Jackson and Main Street where there's no sidewalks. And again, I walk a lot, but one time when that's really an irritant is when there's a football game and there's parking. And, we go to the football games, we park on Main Street or Clay, and we're walking to the stadium. You have to walk in the street because there's already cars parked along there and there's no sidewalk. I mean, it would be a relatively small project that would improve non-motorized mobility through that area quite a bit.
Yeah, and it sounds like it would have that really big positive impact, right? Especially, if around events being at the school.
Yeah, yeah, and of course, students park on Main Street and walk to campus over there, whether they should or not is a different issue, but it happens every school day.
I think those are listed there, Scott, those
Yeah.
Jackson Street
Yeah, it
sidewalk.
is. I would just,
Stadium,
when we're thinking about priorities,
Oh.
to me, that would be a small project, but one that would improve a bottleneck.
Sounds like you're going to want this one on the final list.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
got it.
I'm making my pitch while I got
Got
the chance.
Okay.
Okay,
We
thank
won't
you.
remove it.
Commissioner Howard.
All right, I am using my skills from our zoning overhaul, and I have lots of detailed comments. If it would be better, Mayor Kuntz can have me chunk my comments so other people get a turn, or we can just run through what I've got. The first thing I'd like to note is that I appreciate the new street cross sections. I think they all have planter strips. One of the things that we looked at a few years ago when we were looking at street standards was we did not require planter strips for everything, but there's been studies from Portland to Phoenix that show that having the opportunity to plant trees on any given street makes a significant difference in the urban heat island effect. And if we require these planter strips on streets, then neighborhoods of different levels of affluence won't necessarily suffer because they couldn't afford to plant street trees, or there wasn't the developer didn't put a space in because they were trying to save money. On to some specifics on page 9. So we're looking at the street cross sections. This is something I actually proposed when 99 got its repaving and new sidewalks. It would be for some of the larger streets like the minor arterials where you've got quite a lot of pavement there. Inverting the bike lanes and the planter strips to put the bike lanes closer to the sidewalks and the planter strips closer to the cars would reduce the distance that pedestrians need to cross the street and also provide the opportunity for pedestrian refuge next to the planter strip at intersections. The other thing that I've learned through the work of Jeff Speck, who's an urban planner, is that 30 miles an hour and below, you don't impact level of service if you have 10-foot travel lanes. And I noticed that we generally use 11-foot travel lanes, but we don't have any streets in town other than the very north and very south end of 99, where the speed limit is higher than 30. So I would encourage us to use that space for something other than a travel lane. On page 11, I don't have a lot to say except that I know that level of service, and I don't think it's happening here in this plan, but level of service can often be used counter to mobility for non-motorized vehicles because it puts a priority on throughput. I don't think we're doing that here, which I'm glad about. The other thing, though, is I'm just wondering, it's kind of hard to understand what these numbers mean. VC 0.9, VC 0.85. I was wondering if we could get a mini education on what those numbers actually mean.
So that's volume to capacity ratio. It's if you're at a 1, you're at capacity, right? So that would be failing. And the lower you get, the better the throughput is. And there are varying levels that level of a service D is in that is going to be not as bad as level of service E, and volume to capacity usually aligns with those, but it also depends on the any traffic control types that are at the location and the functional classification of the road.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Mayor Kuntz, stop me when you want to, but on page 13, we've got the access spacing standards. I'm thinking particularly about the public access spacing. These are all minimums. I believe we also have maximums in our city code, and I guess I'm a little surprised that they aren't reflected in the TSP. But I'm also looking at some of them and thinking that for bike and pedestrian access, some of these are quite long. An idea that I introduced, I think, to a couple councilors and may have mentioned at the first open house is the idea of providing a standard for multi-use paths mid-block that would increase the porosity for bike and pedestrian without creating a lot more land use, big wide right-of-ways, breaking up blocks that could be otherwise used for development. Because a car is not going to care between 300 and 500 feet, whereas a pedestrian might care very much. And that might be sort of the best of both worlds. There's definitely communities around the country, I know of several in California, where there's a path network sort of interwoven with the street network. So pedestrians and bicyclists have advantage of both the sidewalks on the streets and a secondary network to increase their access. Page 19. Honestly, my comment is the same. It's this idea of flipping the planter strip bike lane and considering narrowing those travel lanes, because from my understanding, they're wider than they need to be for the speed limits in town. Page 24. So I think we're sort of in a wait-and-see mode for electric vehicles. I know that one of the things that some cities are pursuing is actually installing curbside parking where there are streetlights. As cities have upgraded to LED lights, there's overcapacity for the wires in the ground, and you can actually take advantage of that and have, say, one parking space per block, EV charging. And of course, there's billing enforcement and so forth that goes along with that. But that's a potential way to draw people, especially downtown. Right now we have the charger at Dairy Queen, but if you want the economic development of people who are coming by to come downtown to charge their vehicle, that would serve more than one purpose. Page 28. On EX05, the bridge over near Gentlewoods Park, we had some discussion about that when we were discussing developing property to the north. And I believe that it has, there's some protections for the natural area over there. And the discussion about what type of bridge would be necessary, and maybe that doesn't even come up in this planning document, because as you said, this is not an engineering document.
Yeah,
but I'll reiterate that then, which is that, I don't think just culvert is going to cut it for that space.
Yeah, I think that would be an engineering level consideration farther down the road. This is just identifying the opportunity for the crossing.
Okay, great. One of the street extensions I did not see that's been on my mind is near the police station across from Church Street, where it leads off to the elementary school. In terms of transit enhancements down the road, I've had in mind the idea of having a north loop and a south loop, and we don't necessarily have great connectivity east-west, sort of between Main Street and Hoffman, that would be within good walking distance of a lot of residences, and having a cut through in front of the police station where there's already a multi-use path would let a trolley route run sort of midway up the north-south run of the city.
I'm sorry, are you suggesting one that a cut through that is exclusive to the trolley?
I mean, I suppose that's a possibility. Obviously, that's right on 99, so it's a discussion with ODOT regardless. But having a way for the trolley to have a loop on the north side, assuming it continues to be a success and we have funding for it and we wish to expand it, having a north loop and a south loop seems like a natural extension of what we've got right now with our backbone service between the two communities. The last thing on that page was I wanted to understand the thoughts of adding a dedicated right turn at what I think is the main intersection of 99 and Main Street. Is that IN02? I'm wondering what the vision is for that, because that's already our widest intersection in town. Takes quite a while for pedestrians to cross it, and if we were to widen it to make room for a turn lane, I would have concerns.
I don't think our thinking is that it would be widened, more that it would be reconfigured. Because
Okay.
it is already a very wide intersection.
Yeah, the other thing I noticed about that intersection is that 7-foot wide bike lane that ODOT striped north-south often gets turned into an impromptu turn lane. And it would be awfully nice if it wasn't. Let's see, that was page 28. Page 29. I think we finished PB04, isn't that right? We have the enhanced pedestrian crossing at 99 in Madrona.
Yes, as we were
Okay.
developing this project list, we discussed whether or not to include projects that were either under construction that were under construction when we started the process. And we opted to leave those in.
Okay. Towards the bottom of the page where we're talking about adding bikeways, which I generally think is a fantastic idea, I have seen bike lane stripes, say in Independence, where people are used to parking, and it just turns into parking. And I'm wondering, without slim bollards or some sort of curb, or how are we going to keep it free of vehicles so that it can actually be used?
That's an enforcement issue. Is the long and the short of it. I live in Salem, and we have similar facilities on the north, south, and High and Church streets that with dedicated bike lanes. And at first, that issue did pop up where folks parked in it, but after enough enforcement, now you don't see any parking in it at all. But it is something that does require just, enforcement and education on how to use a facility.
Okay. All right, I'm almost done, I promise. Just on the next page, on 30, we're talking about, I think mostly it's the Main Street improvements PB 2022, or we're talking about bicycle lanes on Main Street from Whitman to Monmouth. I guess I'm wondering how the city sees the downtown commercial district expanding to the west. Maybe we don't, but I'm wondering how those blocks will function if we have bike lanes instead of parking, which again, I'm a fan of bike lanes, but people are used to having parallel parking in front of small businesses downtown, and I'm not clear on how we expect that to function, because I don't think the street's wide enough for buffered parking.
Well, that's going to be a design issue down the road. In some of these locations, it's going to be a matter of making a decision at the planning commission and council levels if parking is going to be sacrificed. Obviously, that's a real hot button issue. You're right, people want parallel parking near businesses. I know we have a couple of transit recommendations installing a bus stop at the cost of a parking parking space. And it's a trade-off. And unless you can find a really creative way to design it where it's safe and you can integrate the parking and the bike lane, and that is possible. But it's difficult to do, and it's a constrained right of way. And it also is a completely new behavior, right, for folks that are used to one way of doing things. It's a process, and it will probably require some level of sacrifice on one side or the other, and that's a decision for you all, really. But it's there if you opt to make that decision, right? And that's going to be your next step, and having it in the plan is going to help if you are soliciting funding from an agency. That it's going to help to say, hey, we have that public buy-in, we have that support. We didn't just pull this out of nowhere, right? It was part of a thorough planning process.
Okay, thanks. I have two more, and then I'm done. A quick one, PB 35 on the next page. Adding bike lanes to Gwynn Street East. Again, I get it from the classification of the street. Most of that street has existing curb extensions. And again, this is an engineering issue, so I was wondering if any thought was given to how to manage retrofitting a street with curb extensions.
It can be done to include a bike lane, and it's a little wide there, so it can be done, but it would need some creativity and possibly shaving down the curb extension slightly. But again, without doing the engineering level analysis, I can't say for certain.
Okay. All right, and my final one's just quick. I talked about the mid-block use paths already. I thought it would also be wise to include them as pedestrian and bike access at the end of cul-de-sacs into the adjoining street. That's another case where, the cars don't really care, and actually people like having less traffic by living on a cul-de-sac. But it really kills walkability if you have to walk up the neck of the cul-de-sac to get where you're, and then around the block to get to the next street. Thank you, everyone, for waiting on my list.
Thank you.
I count on that, Stephen. Thank you very much. Councillor Oberst.
I'd like to just reiterate the notion of extending Church Street next to the police station. I actually dropped a memo into the Russ's box anyway about that turning that into a full 4 intersection, giving folks who live in that northwest quadrant of town an access to the highway that doesn't require going all the way to Powell or Jackson would be desirable. We've got a pedestrian connection through there in the form of that sidewalk. As a bike rider, you get to the end of the sidewalk at the west end and there's a drop off, there's a curb, there's no ramp. And so you have to cut a sharp corner and ride on the sidewalk to the first driveway to access the street. Not good. But the bigger solution, the bigger picture solution would be to go ahead and put it on, and it's we can't depend on a developer to do this one. And the chances of getting out any money out of ODOT, or what would in effect be a local street, slim and none. But I would like to see that project on the list so that it would be, in front of us and future planners, that might be a desirable connection to make. That's an intersection that I believe ODOT has screwed up by taking out the left turn lane. The pedestrian crossing should probably be on the south leg like it is at Madrona. I don't know if we can have some reference to that in this document. It would line up with that sidewalk I mentioned earlier, for one thing. It would also get pedestrians out of the way of folks who want to turn left into Church, particularly at school passing times when they're trying to get to school to pick up their kids. It's just a mess at this point. That whole intersection needs to be rethought. as many of these as we can put into the hopper for being able to talk to ODOT later about that intersection, I would be in favor of. And I think if it gets to be a full four-way intersection, it also ups the odds that it meets warrants in 20 or 30 years for signal. So just that sort of a big picture. And I use that intersection a lot, I will admit. So it's kind of personal, but I'm just kind of appalled at the way it's operating right now. It's not good. Yeah.
Counselor McKeel?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to go back to, I think it was one of the first items that Councilor Howard talked about with having the trees. And I didn't look at the pictures in here as carefully, so he really made me look at that. And I don't know that he alluded to this when he was talking about the PSU study, so I didn't hear clearly enough, but so I'll repeat it, I guess, maybe. But PSU did a study that showed having that in, as Councilor Howard was talking, affluent neighborhoods get trees, and people that are in apartment buildings and less affluent neighborhoods don't. What PSU noticed is that there's a great deal of heat concentration in neighborhoods that are not affluent because they don't have the trees. And I think as we're looking at, a greater amount of heat coming up, this might be something that we should look at with those pictures. I noticed a couple of them had the tree planters, but others had just the plants. But the size of the planter was the same. So is there a reason we couldn't put trees there? And so that might be something that it would be really good to focus on, because not only would it take care of a goal of livability, it would also decrease the heat index in those, if that's the right way to say that, in those neighborhoods that right now just have that super amount of heat.
I think the difference, I'm looking at the pictures, is an 8-foot strip has a tree and a 4-foot strip doesn't.
There's, in another set of pictures, a 5.5 foot, oh, well, my computer's not doing it. There's another set of pictures where there's a 5.5 with a tree, and then there's a 5.5 with a plant. So it appears that it doesn't have to be 8 feet.
It does not. Yeah, they're more, I wouldn't, those are more for just illustration of the options. So yeah, trees are an option on 5.5 foot planter strips.
Yeah, it's a nice idea. What it didn't draw, it's like, oh, pretty plants. Until Commissioner Howard said it, I went, oh, no, we need more trees, and purposefully planting of that. So that's on the tree board there, John, Councilor Oberst. That's where I got that from.
Counselor Carey?
Sort of just a fairly quick laundry list. I think a number of charts and so on references the level of service.
Yeah.
And then there's a letter associated with that. I couldn't find a legend on that or any kind of a.
So a level of service is associated with the amount of time, and I don't know the exact number, but it's associated with the amount of time of delay at an intersection, right? So if you're sitting at an intersection at a light and it cycles through a couple times before you're able to cross it, that's a failing intersection, right? One that's that where you're at the red light and then you get to go through, that's going to have a better rating, right? And it's like a report card, like A, B, C, D, E, and F. Right? It's a matter. It's going to be a trade-off at some point. And you could have just a dedicated RFP for bikes and peds, or you could have something more or less robust. It's just a matter of studying the location, probably doing more counts if you're really considering your treatment at that location, and going from there and trying to line up what the treatment is with what the need is at that location. But yeah, crossing 99 it's an issue, no doubt about it. Yeah.
Carol, did you?
Yeah.
So bringing my bike creds to this. So actually, I think having the clay street and then you could turn to go down Madrona because Madrona is in here as developing the bike. You could also just turn left to go, I mean, going that way, obviously, turning left, going up, back up the main street, because I think the main street is also going to get fixed, because right now, it's like riding a bike in Indiana, it's just a death wish. So I think once you have those two routes, I think, I rode my bicycle around Bend, and Bend has this real, take this road, that road, and it's okay. I think what we could do to help bicyclists who might not know where those bike routes are is to put designated bike paths or bike routes signs
Yes.
along the street to make that easier. So I don't mind the idea that it goes from Monmouth to Whitman and then crosses down into Clay and then goes down and you take Madrona. And I think that's a legitimate bike route.
These kinds of strategies will be in that toolbox that I mentioned earlier. Signage and kind of branding is definitely a powerful tool.
Counselor Overs.
And I wanted to say thanks for the section on traffic calming measures. I pushed hard when I was in CISA seat to get even rudimentary traffic calming. And I ran into a city manager and a police chief who thought that they were bad ideas and it went nowhere. And we're in a situation right now where we're talking about a public safety fee and our police ability to enforce traffic stuff is down because they're so involved in all of the calls for service. And they can't do that self-initiated stuff. I want to say it's Argentina where I heard this came from. They refer to speed bumps and the like as the policeman who never sleeps, because those traffic calming measures are out there all the time. And it slows people down. It convinces them maybe that's not the best route to take, cut through traffic and the like. And, to finally have in our official document a list of proposed treatments is really important. I would love to see us adopt a zoning code piece that says new residential construction gets curb bulb outs at every intersection, for example. We have a neighborhood like that. And I tried to argue that that would be a good idea. And I was told the street sweeper can't sweep those. There were just excuses everywhere for why we shouldn't do these things. And I'm in favor of seeing those go on. So I love this list. Thank you. Thanks for getting this in there.
Bill? Commissioner Foster.
Well, I really don't have a lot to say about the planning here. The thing we've overlooked, I think, and this is great because we're saying this is what we want and this is how we're going to build. What we forget, I think, right now is the pressure that it's going to put on our budgets, the pressures it's going to put on our shops and the manpower there. So, those are things we aren't considering here. I understand that, but those things you have to look at because we have to go back to the citizen and say, yeah, look what we did. Oh, by the way, it's going to cost you an extra $5 per thousand on your housing. Those are the things we have to look at. All these things are great. I can't say I agree with all of them, but they are great and they're good planning. But we have to look at the long picture of how that's going to financially affect this city as well.
Any others? I had kind of a question. All the trolley stuff, right? Clearly is about stops and things like that at this point. How do we take into account for future planning the impact on the need for the roads if we have continued trolley service, expanded trolley service, things like that? Because we're trying to find money to keep and expand our trolley. And it'd be great to say, hey, and it keeps this many cars off the road. And what kind of data do we need to collect and how would we bake that in?
It's tricky. The ridership data, obviously, and surveying the riders. Where are they getting, where are they from? Where are they going? Where are they getting, where are folks getting on? Where are they getting off? Trolley systems, they constantly, even if you have great funding, right? They're constantly being tweaked. You add a couple stops, but you're adding more time, right? You reduce the stop, you save time, but you're not getting as many riders. It's a constant, it's really iterative. So tracking when folks are tracking the ridership, the where and the times of day that they're alighting, and that's critical as well, to kind of refine it, right? And then as development occurs, right, does it make sense? If we're talking about affordable housing, right, that's an ideal candidate for a trolley stop, right? So is it possible to modify the route, right, to accommodate the affordable housing, right? Or if there's a medical center that's constructed, or those kinds of things. I just always have it in your head when there's new development, and really tracking the ridership is key.
Of course, it's complicated by the fact that it's not just our transportation plan, right? So going across two cities
A lot of
makes
collaboration is needed.
All right, other questions? And did we lose our folks online or just?
I think they're there. I think the camera's off.
We are back.
Okay, all right, at least we can't see you, but you're still there, we can hear you. All right, any other questions, comments? Councilor Garrett.
Any suggestions on how we prioritize these things?
So we will have that financially constrained project list, and because that will be the more affordable list of projects, I would anticipate that those would be earlier on the list. Having done a lot of grant writing and looking for money, the key is aligning the funding stream with the project, right? The example we talked about before, the Safe Routes to School project, the one street doesn't have enough volume and speed on it to score well, right? For Safe Routes to School funding, right? That funding streams and grants always have these kinds of strings, right? So it's as time passes, your staff will get really good at identifying if this is a really good Safe Routes project, but maybe this one isn't. This one might be better for Safe Streets for All, right? Or better for all roads transportation safety. That you get real good very quickly at identifying which ones work for which slot, right? And then having the constrained list will really help. But having the overall list, it'll make it very easy or easier for staff to just refer to that list when opportunities arise. Like, okay, this one works, this one doesn't, this one works, this one doesn't, and why? Because all of those funding streams have very specific metrics that they entail. The Safe Routes to School has several. Many of them are tied to the school itself, right? How many how many lunches, how many free lunches. I remember that was a big metric for years. I think it still is. So you line those things up, and is it within the quarter mile of the school? Is it within half mile of the school? The proposed project. So it might work for Safe Routes, but it might not. But your staff will get really good at that very quickly as they go through funding cycles. Hopefully not. Yeah.
All right. Seeing no,
Thanks for all the hard work, Anthony.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
It has been a pleasure working with you guys too, I gotta say.
Great,
It's
thank
good
you so
stuff.
much. And it's been great. Your city staff is fantastic. They've been super engaged and helpful, and anytime we've requested anything, they've been great about getting back to us very quickly. It's made this project fun to work on and really painless. So it's been great. Thank you.
all right, and seeing no others, and Stephen, any other wrap-up comments, or Russ?
I don't have any, thank you.
Yeah, I would just like to add a thank you to everybody for the feedback tonight, answering the prioritizing question. Conversations like this help us to prioritize that list. A lot of the topics that have been discussed, have been discussed in other venues as well. So it all helps to support. We hear, and when I talk about what a project list that represents Monmouth, when we hear about projects from different folks across town, those are the ones that rise up as priorities. So thank you for your time tonight. And Anthony, thank you for yours as well.
Sure. Thank you, Russ.
All right, and on that note, we are adjourned.
Thank you. This is good.
Oh, great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Thanks. That's always the trick, right? Is making this, yeah.